in the beginning of the session, but it really does not highlight on the negative list and the sensitive list, so to say. Now, this brings me to a lovely study which I was only exposed to yesterday. That's a study by my friend Shashi Gopalan and his team. The work which they have done for the, Shashi might get a chance to speak on that later on, and which they have done. And they say that if the negative list has been removed, or there have been more commodities brought on the positive list, then there are potential welfare gains, and that has to be actually taken into account while doing both the liberalization counts, whether it's in the partial equilibrium framework or in the general equilibrium framework. And that brings me to the last part of the thing, the extremely important presentation by Dr. Manzoor Ahmed. He really gives us a broad canvas. On the one hand, he talks about trade facilitation, which is indeed important today, which is the non-tariff barrier which raises transaction costs or any trade costs actually, and facilitating. And to do that, one is to go ahead is one to do the harmonization of customs rules, computerization at the borders is become very important before anything can take place. And then a joint testing house, the time loss that he mentioned about measuring the things on both sides, and that joint testing house, maybe there are Pakistani skills, Indian skills, which can be brought together, and then that can be done. The last but of not least importance, or before I move to the last important thing, is the global supply chain management. And I highlighted about this because FDI forms a very important, FDI between the two countries become a very important thing if global or regional or bilateral supply chain production networks have to be formed. And that needs some attention, I think, right at the moment. Before I close, the last but not of least importance is the people-to-people movement. I myself, I have gone to Pakistan, and the kind of warmth I have received in Pakistan way back in 2004, it was amazing actually. And in that process, I think I should end with that. My friend Deb Kusum does a very commendable work. He brings together the students of South Asia in a forum called South Asia Economic Students Meet, where students from all the countries in South Asia come together and exchange their views, present, and I have been part of that, and it's an excellent, commendable job done. And that's because they are the future, the students are the future, and they should be brought into the fold. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we've had a pretty exhaustive session already, and we've learned a lot. Now we have about 20 minutes or so for some questions from the floor. And if you want to I'm afraid due to shortage of time, I'm going to restrict you to very brief comments or questions. Yes, up. Please go ahead.
Thanks.
And introduce yourself, please.
Shashi Gopalan from George Mason University. Actually, this is going back to the CG question on the simulation results Saikat was referring to. I think it's important to distinguish the MFN-based trade versus free trade. That most of the discussions between India and Pakistan gets confounded by the SAFTA discussions. The reason being because the first step is the MFN-based trade, and then as we all understand that it's not a complete tariff liberalization, and they still get to maintain MFN tariffs that they do with the rest of the world. So then that could have potential implications for the domestic output losses and associated price shifts that we talk about normally. And in that context, that's when he was talking about the partial equilibrium framework, it's a more expansive version of what Dr. Nisha was talking about earlier. We can collapse the results in the form of domestic output losses and also the associated tariff revenues, and you can play around with the elasticities of substitution, because that makes more sense to treat the imports that coming from India as imperfect substitutes to the domestically produced goods in Pakistan, and to what extent those shifts matter in contributing to output losses. And I think the study that we just did present a positive picture, to going back to your own comments, and Auto parts is a case in point where definitely the concerns are unwarranted, and the losses, if you want to call them, are very modest, and the gains are very, very significant. And yeah, that's just an addition I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please. Pradeep Sehgal Saab.
Thank you, sir. I would briefly touch upon 2-3 points which I've observed. We have seen the data. My contention is that one point is being missed, that because of the, hindrance, also the blockages of tariff items, a lot of traditional routes have developed, like exporting from India via Dubai, and which is actually happening from Afghanistan, and which is still happening, though the products have now moved to the negative list. So that means that they are allowed now. Till that, that route loses its shine and people start trading from the normal route, I think we will not have the true picture in the data. And that, in fact, is killing the formal trade to some extent. Second thing would be that when we say the negative list, it's of 1,299 items. There's a list of 137 items which can be traded from Wagah. So practically speaking, when we talk about the land route, leaving aside the sea route, land route is only doing trade in those 137 items. So we're missing on a bigger chunk of that. So that is, again, when we say that this is the data of the land route and the sea route, it's totally distorted. Because sea route, you can do anything. But in the land route, because railway is not performing and it's not capable of handling everything. So if you pick up the figures, you will find that they're mostly focused on those 137 items. And third is about the FDI. One major point is that a lot of talk is happening about the FDI. One major missing link, which is not going to let it happen very soon, is that there is no provision of work visas in our visa regime at present. So that's not going to make it happen. That's a big roadblock in that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. I'll come to you. The gentleman there.
Consultant with UNCTAD. I was a resident of Pakistan before partition. I see this, I recommend complete trade facilitation between India and Pakistan. We should not be restrictive. It used to be one country. But important other aspect which comes to is how the banking system, because trade cannot happen just in the cloud. There should be a lot of coordination between two banks, India and Pakistan. So I should like to hear something about this banking sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'll take one more. Yes.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, Sanjay Kathuria. I just want to make couple of very quick points. I think just because it's so important, I want to reiterate the point made by Aradhana. I think, and Mr. Pasha need not feel so worried about the results of CG modeling. I think there is a very strong inherent limitation in CG modeling, which is that it's restricted by the current trade patterns. And therefore, anything that we do is based on those. So if you're starting with a base of $2 billion of export in a particular product, there's only so far you can go with simulations and free trade arrangements and so on. The problem is also that the database that is the core of the CG models, it does not take into account, for example, the very substantial trade that comes in through Dubai. I mean, that's whatever, twofold, threefold of the existing trade. So that's completely neglected there. And so the results that come out must be taken with a huge pinch of salt, not to deny the importance. We must do this to get indicative senses of where the direction of movement is. But we certainly must not overplay and exaggerate the impact of that. The second point is that, there's always, when there's always opening up, the smaller countries, in any kind of arrangement, when it was NAFTA, it was the US versus, Mexico, and, there was always worries about which is the countries that actually gain. Now, we've seen that, for example, in NAFTA, Mexico has gained very substantial amount, more than the United States, from the opening up of borders to each other. In the case of Pakistan, I was in Bangladesh, so I know there's lots of fear about, opening up to India. The point is that there is already competitive suppliers existing. I mean, it's that even though the bilateral market is not opened up, it's not as if that space is vacant. There is already supply there by domestic suppliers, also by China, which is a giant in the region and in the whole world. So, so mere opening up or providing MFN status to India or Pakistan is not going to change the landscape utterly, because there is already a supply chain in place there. So you have to displace that existing supply chain, which is easier said than done. I think this point is very much neglected, and therefore I want to also endorse what what Mr. Ahmed said. I think there is no substitute for those kinds of very detailed sectoral studies, which will actually point the true picture. But I just want to say to Mr. Ahmed, the one point he talked about managed trade. I think in the context that we are working in, I would particularly, at least personal level, be very skeptical about the fruits or the possibilities of doing that kind of thing. I think I would rather open up the environment to FDI and then let the private sector do its bit. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, can I request Dr. Sasidharan? Is he here? You've already spoken. You didn't introduce yourself. There was one final question from, yes, please.
Dr. Amanullah from Lahore, associate professor here in the South Asian University, teaching since last 6 months. So one lady, she commented that political events have a great impact on trade and economy. And she suggested so many successful experiences that many countries have removed these barriers. So, but there has been a deficiency to throw light on this area, that political incidents should not have a greater impact on the ongoing trade. Is there some mechanism which can be evolved that these two things should be detached with each other?
Through the general equilibrium modeling. And given the fact that this is very complex and technical in nature, I have requested Dr. Purohit to have bilateral with the various commenters on his modeling, rather than get into, and the trouble with us economists is that we get together, if there are 2 economists, there are 3 opinions. So as far as the estimates are concerned, Nisha reassures us that trade volumes could go up by a factor of almost 5 to 6 times. I mean, that's the volume increase she's hoping to achieve. Whereas with a very liberalized scenario, free trade, and of course with transportation facilitation, Purohit comes to a modest increase of about 100 to 110% in the case of India. So there's a divergence between 500% increase and 100% increase. So I really, honestly, with all due respects, what I've learned as a teacher is to average them out. Because the gap is so large. Now, however, I think there are some the immediate implications which I'd like to emphasize. I don't want to get lost in the academic aspects of the debate. It's extremely important that we focus on the short-term realities and try incrementally to achieve progress. It's not very useful to say that 20 years down the road, trade could be 20 times as much. In particular, I hope at the end of this conference, we will be able to establish that the remaining 18% of items which have not been put yet on the free list of Pakistan, which would have led to the full granting of MFN status, and if India were to follow a quid pro quo with a sensitive list down to 100 items, and we would continue the momentum that we have built up on non-trade barriers, including particularly visa relaxation, on which we have seen fits and starts, including on the Pakistani side. Please tell us at the end of this conference what precisely we expect are going to be the benefits. Those of us, like Dr. Salman Shah and myself and others, who have a role in terms of advisory capacity, do want to tell our government soon after the elections that please move ahead. It's become much more of a symbol Frankly, and you look at the numbers. India has a sensitive list of 614 items. Pakistan has a sensitive list of over 1,000 items. One of my MPhil students comes back and tells me, sir, ये तो 6 digit पे है. जब आप 8 digit पे करेंगे तो इंडिया की लिस्ट तो हमसे भी लंबी है. India has 1753 items, we have only 1550 items. So India is damn good at projecting the right kind of image to the world. कि हमने सारे concession किए हुए, हालांकि हम पाकिस्तानी मासूम लोग बैठे हुए सारे concession करके. So, I think it's extremely important that we focus on the short run and try and achieve a breakthrough, because quite honestly, you know, I have the dubious distinction of 20 years ago being the first Commerce Minister of Pakistan to open trade with India. Believe it or not, we were importing cement from India. You have since run into a huge deficit, and we are exporting cement to you. The economics is very simple. We were importing cement from Romania, जिसे कहते हैं ना दुनिया के पिछवाड़े में. And the delivery time was about 4 to 6 months. Here I was, a professorial young kind of lost commerce minister. So I speak to the Indian High Commissioner and I say, कि आपके Volga border के उस तरफ आपके पास surplus है, can you please send some? He says, certainly sir. 2 हफ्ते में माल आ जाएगा आपके पास. So your very eager Minister for Indo-Pakistan Trade goes ahead, gets cabinet approval. And I decide proudly to go to the press conference, KG, here is $25 million saved for Pakistan in one deal. Do you know what happened? I was massacred by the media because I was born in India. Oh. I was declared an Indian agent. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for an extremely useful and profitable session. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope we have set the tempo for the remaining conference. Thank you.
May I request all of you to be seated because Mr. S.R. Rao, Commerce Secretary, is going to give the address. And soup will be served on the tables here while we listen to his address. And following that, we'll break for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you for a very good session.
Oh, thank you. You were a wonderful chair. Wonderful. Extensively at policy and implementation levels in industry, urban and rural development, ports management, primary health service delivery, medical services, education, nuclear energy, information technology, and telecommunications. So he's had a very wide range of portfolios. He has worked in both developmental and regulatory sectors at strategic policy support levels. Mr. Rao was conferred Padma Shri by Government of India in '98 and was Eisenhower Fellow in the same year. He has received the United Nations Habitat Award for Best Practices in 1997 and the National Science Foundation Award in Public Health in 1996. Mr. Rao joined the Indian Administrative Service in '78. May I request Mr. Rao to please begin his address?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. It's indeed an immense privilege and great delight to meet members of my community from across the border. We are all engaged in trade and commerce and engaging economically for the mutual prosperity of our peoples on both sides. The word India-Pakistan always evokes a great deal of emotions. to each one of us in this subcontinent. There's a very telling point. There was a conversation I was having with a senior of mine in civil service, a very eminent member of civil service from Pakistan, Zafar Mahmood Saab, who was Commerce Secretary along with my illustrious predecessor, Dr. Khulla. In more senses than one, both are the chief architects, with the blessings of ministers on either side, in taking the current dialogue of trade normalization ties forward. The discussion I was referring to was when Zafar Mahmood Saab had moved out from Department of Commerce as Secretary Energy or Power. I'm not too sure how the ministry is called in Pakistan. When he came to Delhi for a meeting with his colleague Secretary Power from our side, I very much wanted to go and take inspiration from Zafar Mahmood Saab. So I had a small window of opportunity. I met him at the hotel he was stopping by. During the conversation, he made a very telling point, of which I was, it never ever struck me as the perspective from which he was coming. He said, look at France and Germany. They've been at war for 1,000 years. And then, post-Second World War, both countries' economies are integrated into common economic union. Now they live as perfect neighbors. Despite 1,000 years of civil war between both countries, which lost many lives. He said, both our countries are divided politically just about 60 odd years ago. Is there a single reason why economy and business cannot set the tone for normalization of ties, which eventually would lead to building of trust on either sides? Well, I had no answer. Every which way I looked since then at this very telling point,